The room was full of music, champagne glasses, wedding laughter. My cousin's reception had just started. Guests were smiling, cameras flashing, people congratulating the bride and groom. Then my father suddenly stood up. He lifted his glass. Everyone thought he was about to give a normal toast. Instead, he said something that made the entire room freeze. "Before we celebrate, there's something everyone here should know." He turned and pointed directly at me. And then he said the words that changed everything. "She isn't our real daughter." The room went silent. But the strangest part? My sister started smiling. "My name is Claire Henderson. I'm 28 years old and I live in Seattle, Washington." Until that night, I believed I understood my family, my parents, my sister, my grandmother. But one sentence at a wedding was about to unravel 28 years of lies. Before I tell you what happened next, I want to ask you something. If you suddenly discovered your entire life might be a lie, what would you do? Tell me in the comments. I read every single comment. Now let me explain how that moment happened. The wedding itself wasn't unusual. My cousin Emily was getting married. The entire extended family had gathered at a lakeside venue outside Seattle. White flowers, string lights, a large dance floor. It was supposed to be a happy event. But from the moment we arrived, something felt strange. My parents were unusually quiet, and my younger sister Olivia looked unusually confident. Olivia had always been the favorite, 2 years younger than me. More attention, more praise, more support. Growing up, I was the responsible one, the one who helped around the house, the one who stayed quiet when arguments started. Olivia was the one who got new cars, expensive gifts, and constant compliments. But even with that imbalance, I never imagined the secret they were hiding. During dinner, I noticed something odd. My parents kept whispering to Olivia. My father looked nervous. My mother looked tense. Olivia, however, looked excited, like someone waiting for a surprise. At first, I assumed it had something to do with the wedding, but then my grandmother noticed it too. She watched the three of them carefully, and she didn't look pleased. After dinner, the DJ asked if anyone wanted to give a toast. My father stood up immediately, which was unusual. My dad hated public speaking. People clapped politely as he walked to the microphone. Everyone expected a sweet speech about the bride and groom. Instead, he turned his attention toward my table, toward me. He raised his glass. "Tonight is about honesty," he said. Guests laughed politely. Then he continued, "And there's something our family has hidden for too long." My stomach tightened, because suddenly the entire room was looking at me. Then he pointed directly at my chair and said the words that still echo in my head. "Claire is not our real daughter." For several seconds, nobody moved. People started whispering. My aunt dropped her fork. My cousin looked confused, and my sister Olivia was smiling, not shocked, not confused, smiling, like she had been waiting for that exact moment. Then someone else stood up, slowly, carefully. My grandmother. She was 82 years old, but that night she looked stronger than anyone else in the room. She walked toward the center of the hall carrying something in her purse, a sealed envelope, and her voice was calm. "Before anyone believes this story, I think we should open this. If you enjoy stories where the truth slowly unfolds and secrets finally come out, make sure you subscribe and tell me in the comments, do you think my father was telling the truth or hiding something much bigger?" Because what my grandmother revealed next made my parents turn pale. My grandmother placed the envelope on the table. Everyone leaned forward. My father suddenly looked nervous. My mother whispered something to Olivia, but it was too late, because my grandmother slowly opened the envelope. Inside were documents, old ones, yellowed with time, And when she pulled them out, she said something that made the entire room stop breathing. Claire deserves to know the truth. And so does everyone else. My grandmother slowly pulled the first paper out of the envelope. The room was so quiet you could hear glasses being set down. It wasn't a letter. It was a hospital document. A birth record. Dated 28 years ago. My father suddenly stepped forward. "Mom, that's not necessary," he said quickly. But my grandmother ignored him. She placed the document on the table where everyone could see it. And then she looked directly at me. "Claire," she said softly, "you deserve to hear the truth." I leaned closer. The document had a hospital seal at the top, and a name written clearly in the middle. Mother, Rebecca Henderson. That was my mom. But the next line made my chest tighten. Infant. Female. Adopted through private family guardianship. Adopted. The word felt heavy in the air. My sister Olivia's smile suddenly faded, because this wasn't the story they expected to tell. My father quickly grabbed the microphone again. "This doesn't change anything," he said. "Yes, Claire was adopted. But she isn't our biological daughter." People in the room started whispering again, but my grandmother raised her hand. "Let me finish." Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried authority that made everyone stop. She pulled out another document. Older. More fragile. This one had several signatures at the bottom. Legal signatures. One of them belonged to my grandmother herself. The second belonged to someone unexpected. My father. And the third signature made my mother suddenly sit down. My mother's face had turned pale. She looked at my grandmother and whispered, "You promised you would never show that." My grandmother answered calmly, "I promised to protect Claire. Not your lie." The room went completely silent again, because suddenly everyone realized this wasn't just about adoption. There was something much bigger hiding behind it. My grandmother looked at the guests, then back at me. "You weren't adopted the way your father just described." She paused for a moment. Then she said something that made my entire childhood feel uncertain. "Claire, you were born into this family." My father froze. My sister looked confused, and I felt like the ground beneath my chair had shifted. My grandmother continued slowly. "Your mother had you when she was very young. You were born before she married your father." Gasps spread through the room. My father's jaw tightened, because suddenly the story he told moments earlier no longer made sense. My grandmother explained the rest. At the time, my father had refused to marry my mother. He didn't want the responsibility. So my grandmother temporarily became my legal guardian, just until the family situation stabilized. But that temporary decision became a secret they kept for decades. If you're still listening, this story only gets more complicated. Family secrets have a strange way of staying hidden for years, until one moment exposes everything. Tell me in the comments, do you think my father was trying to protect the family or protect himself? I read every single comment. Now let me tell you what happened when my grandmother revealed the final document. My grandmother lifted the final paper. This one was newer. A legal document from 20 years ago. It showed that my parents had officially listed me as their daughter. No adoption, no separation, just a legal confirmation of something that had always been true. I was never an outsider. I was always part of the family. My father didn't speak anymore. My sister looked at him with confusion. Relatives whispered around the tables, because the story he had tried to tell had completely collapsed. And standing there in the middle of the wedding hall, my grandmother calmly folded the documents back into the envelope. Then she looked at my father and said quietly, "You should have told the truth yourself." After my grandmother finished speaking, the wedding hall stayed completely silent. Everyone was looking at my father, because the obvious question was now floating in the air. If I was always part of the family, Then why would he suddenly stand up at a wedding and announce I wasn't his real daughter? My grandmother looked directly at him. "Do you want to explain now?" she asked. My father didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked toward my sister Olivia. For the first time that night, Olivia didn't look confident anymore. Her smile had disappeared. She looked nervous, almost like a plan had suddenly gone wrong. My aunt noticed it too. "Olivia?" she asked carefully. "Did you know about this?" My sister hesitated. Then she said quietly, "I only knew part of it." Around the room, guests began whispering. Weddings are supposed to be about celebration, but suddenly the reception had turned into a family confrontation. Even the bride and groom were watching quietly from their table, because whatever was happening now was clearly much bigger than a simple toast. Finally, my father cleared his throat. "Claire wasn't supposed to find out like this." The sentence sounded strange, because he was the one who had said it out loud. I folded my arms. "Then why did you tell everyone?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked toward Olivia again. My grandmother noticed the glance immediately, her eyes narrowed. "Olivia," she said calmly, "what did you tell your father?" The question hung in the air, because suddenly it seemed like my sister had been involved in something that had pushed my father to reveal the secret publicly. Olivia finally spoke. "I thought Claire already knew," she said quickly. Everyone stared at her. "What do you mean?" my aunt asked. Olivia shifted in her chair. "I overheard Grandma and Mom talking about it months ago." She looked at me. "I assumed you knew the whole story." My father nodded slowly. "Olivia told me you had already found the documents." My confusion grew. "What documents?" My father looked surprised. "The adoption records?" My grandmother sighed quietly, because now the situation was starting to make sense. Apparently, Olivia had overheard a conversation months earlier. She misunderstood what she heard. Then she told my father that I had discovered the family secret. My father panicked. He thought the truth was about to come out anyway, so he decided to reveal it himself. At the worst possible moment. Stories like this show how quickly misunderstandings can spiral out of control. One assumption, one conversation taken the wrong way, and suddenly an entire family secret explodes in public. If you're still listening, thank you for being here. Tell me in the comments, do you think my father panicked? Or was there another reason he revealed the secret? I read every single comment, because what happened next made the situation even more complicated. My grandmother looked at my father with disappointment. "All these years we protected Claire from unnecessary drama, and tonight you decided to announce it during a wedding." My father rubbed his forehead. "It wasn't supposed to turn into this." But of course, it already had. Just when it seemed like the truth was finally clear, my grandmother slowly picked up the envelope again. "There's still one more thing," she said. Everyone in the room leaned forward, because apparently, the documents she showed earlier weren't the entire story. And the final page in that envelope was about to reveal something none of us expected. My grandmother slowly pulled the final paper from the envelope. The room leaned forward again, because at this point everyone thought the story was finished. Adoption confusion, family secrets, a misunderstanding between my father and sister. But my grandmother held the document carefully. "This," she said calmly, "is the part no one here knows." My father immediately looked nervous again. "Mom, we don't need to go into that." My grandmother didn't even look at him. "Yes," she said quietly. "We do." The paper looked older than the others. It was another hospital document. But this one had more details. My grandmother turned it so I could see the name clearly. My name, Claire Henderson. But beneath it, there was another name listed under father. And it wasn't the man standing across the room. Gasps spread through the guests. My father's face turned pale. My mother suddenly stood up. "Mom, that's private," she said sharply. But the truth had already landed. Because the document made something very clear. The man who raised me was never my biological father. For several seconds, no one spoke. My cousin Emily slowly sat down at her table. Even the DJ had stopped the music. My grandmother looked at my father again. "You always knew the truth," she said, "and you still chose to raise her." The room shifted slightly, because suddenly my father wasn't just the villain anymore, he was also the man who stayed. My father rubbed his face slowly. "Yes," he admitted quietly. "I knew." He looked at me. From the beginning. People in the room exchanged glances, because the story had suddenly become much more complicated than anyone expected. My grandmother spoke again. "Your mother was young when she met your biological father. He disappeared before you were born." She looked at my father. "And this man chose to marry her anyway." To everyone listening, that detail changed the entire tone of the room, because now the truth wasn't just scandal, it was sacrifice. My sister Olivia looked confused now, because the reaction she expected from the room never happened. No one was treating me like an outsider. Instead, people were looking at my father differently, with a strange mix of respect and discomfort. If you're still here listening to this story, thank you. Family secrets can stay hidden for decades, and sometimes when the truth finally appears, it doesn't destroy relationships. It reveals the ones that were real all along. Tell me in the comments, would you see the man who raised you as your real father, even if you discovered he wasn't biologically related? I read every single comment, because the moment that happened next changed everything again. My grandmother folded the document carefully. Then she said something that made the room quiet again. "Claire was never the secret." She looked at my parents. "The lie was pretending this family was perfect." That sentence landed heavier than any of the documents. My father finally walked closer to my table. "Claire," he said quietly, "I never meant for you to hear this in a room full of strangers." I nodded slowly. "But you said it anyway." He sighed. "Yes." For the first time that evening, he looked genuinely ashamed. After a long moment, my grandmother stood up again. "Well," she said calmly, "this is still a wedding." The DJ slowly restarted the music. Guests began talking again. The reception slowly returned to life, but nothing in that room felt the same anymore. Because now everyone knew the truth. The music slowly filled the room again. People began talking. Glasses clinked. But the energy in the hall had changed. Everyone now knew something about my life that I had just learned myself. And strangely, no one looked at me with pity. Instead, many people looked at my father, because they were trying to understand the man who had just revealed such a complicated truth. I stepped outside the reception hall for some air. The lake behind the venue was quiet. My mind was replaying everything: the documents, my grandmother's words, my father's silence, and the realization that biology had never been the most important part of my life. The man who raised me had still been there every single day. A few minutes later, the door opened behind me. My father walked outside. He didn't say anything at first. He just stood next to me looking at the lake. Finally, he spoke. "I never wanted you to find out like that." His voice sounded tired, not defensive, just honest. I turned toward him. "Did you ever think of me as your daughter?" The question surprised him. Then he answered immediately. "Every single day." There was no hesitation in his voice, and suddenly the documents from the envelope didn't feel as powerful anymore, because sometimes the truth of a relationship isn't written on paper. A moment later, my sister Olivia stepped outside too. She looked uncomfortable. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen," she said. Apparently, her earlier misunderstanding had started the chain reaction. The whisper she overheard months ago, the assumption she shared with my father, and the panic that followed. Then my grandmother joined us. She looked at all three of us quietly. "For years I kept those papers hidden," she said, "not because the truth was shameful, but because some truths only create pain when they are revealed the wrong way." Everyone understood what she meant. That wedding speech had been the wrong way. If you've listened to this entire story, thank you. Family secrets can stay hidden for decades, but sometimes when the truth finally appears, it doesn't destroy the relationships that matter. It simply reveals which ones were real all along. Tell me in the comments, if you discovered the person who raised you wasn't biologically related, would it change how you see them? I read every single comment. Eventually, we walked back into the reception hall together. The band was playing again. Guests were dancing. The bride and groom had finally returned to celebrating. For everyone else in the room, the evening was returning to normal. But for our family, the night had changed something permanently. Later that evening, Olivia came to sit beside me. "I always thought you were stronger than me," she admitted quietly. That surprised me, because growing up it had always seemed like she was the confident one. But apparently she had been comparing herself to me the entire time, just in a different way. As the reception ended, my grandmother said something that stayed with me. "Families aren't built by biology alone," she said. "They're built by the people who stay." Looking around the room, I realized she was right, because the man who had raised me was still standing there, and that mattered more than anything written on those documents. By the end of the night, everyone knew the truth. My biological father had never been part of my life. The man who raised me had chosen to stay anyway, and despite everything that had been revealed, one thing never changed. When people asked who my father was, I still looked at the same man. Because sometimes the truth that shocks everyone else doesn't actually change the people who matter.